When a billionaire tells you to make someone laugh, you don't ask why. You ask how much. I've always believed that laughter could fix almost anything. Heartbreak, bad days, broken dreams. But that belief was easy when it was just words on a stage, and not something a stranger was willing to pay for, like it was medicine. My name is Ethan Cole, and until that morning, I was just another washed-up comedian with more unpaid bills than punchlines that worked. I'd been performing in dimly lit bars, half-empty comedy clubs, and late-night diners that doubled as open mic stages, trying to make people forget their own lives for 10 minutes at a time, even though I couldn't fix my own. Rent was overdue, my car hadn't started in 3 days, and my phone was a graveyard of ignored collection calls. That was my life. Survival by humor, desperation hidden behind sarcasm. The day everything changed started with a call I almost didn't answer. The number flashing on my cracked phone screen was unknown, area code I didn't recognize. Normally, that meant another scam or a landlord demanding what I didn't have. But something in me, maybe boredom, maybe instinct, made me pick up. The voice on the other end was smooth, crisp, practiced. "Mr. Cole, my employer would like to meet you regarding a private performance contract." I laughed, thinking it was another prank from the guys at the club. "Yeah? What's the gig? A birthday party for a retirement home?" The man didn't laugh. "The offer comes from Mr. Jonathan Sterling. I'm sending a car to pick you up in an hour. Please be ready." Jonathan Sterling. Even if you're broke, you know that name. He was the kind of billionaire who didn't buy companies. He bought industries. Oil, technology, real estate. If it made money, he owned it. I thought there was no way in hell this was real. But exactly 1 hour later, a black Mercedes pulled up outside my rundown apartment. Driver in a suit, no questions asked. That's when the laughter stopped feeling funny. The car ride was silent except for the faint hum of jazz from the radio. Outside the tinted windows, the world looked smaller, poorer, like I'd already crossed into another reality. We drove for over an hour before the city turned into rolling hills, and then into the kind of countryside that looks like old money, endless fences, horses grazing, and a mansion in the distance that didn't just say wealth, it screamed legacy. When we stopped at the gates, 2 security guards stepped forward, scanning the car, checking me like I was carrying state secrets instead of jokes. Inside the mansion, everything was immaculate. Marble floors that reflected your own discomfort. Hallways so quiet they made you feel guilty for breathing too loudly. I was escorted into a library big enough to fit my entire apartment building. That's where I saw him. Jonathan Sterling, the man who looked like he owned gravity. Silver hair, posture carved from confidence, and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Cole," he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from him, "I've seen your performances." My brain scrambled. How could a man like him have seen my shows when I couldn't even afford online promotion? He continued, "You make people laugh. That's a rare skill. I need that skill for someone close to me." He poured himself a drink, but didn't offer me one. I could tell he wasn't used to sharing anything, not even small courtesies. "I'm not sure I follow," I said cautiously. "You want me to perform at an event?" "Not exactly," he replied. "It's private, no audience, just one person, my daughter." That threw me off. "Your daughter?" "She hasn't laughed in 3 years," he said matter-of-factly, as if it were a business metric rather than a tragedy. "Not once, not even a smile. I've tried everything. Doctors, therapists, medications, vacations. Nothing worked. So I thought perhaps laughter might." I didn't know how to respond. "Billionaires usually call therapists, not comedians," he continued, his tone colder, rehearsed, like he'd told this story before and stopped expecting sympathy. "She's 25. Bright, educated, beautiful, and broken. Her mother's death changed her. I can't reach her anymore." His jaw tightened, the faintest crack in the armor. Then he turned those steel-gray eyes on me. "If you can make her laugh, I'll double your pay. No questions asked, but if you fail, you'll leave immediately. Do we have a deal? My instinct was to say yes, because saying no to money like that wasn't an option. But something in his voice, that tone that wasn't fatherly, not even human, more like a man trying to buy redemption, made my chest tighten. What exactly do you expect me to do? I asked. He stood and walked toward a massive window overlooking the estate. Do whatever you have to. Tell jokes, act foolish, remind her what it feels like to live again. Just make her laugh. That's when I realized this wasn't a comedy gig. It was a transaction wrapped in desperation. Still, I shook his hand. And the moment I did, something in his grip felt final, like a door closing behind me. The butler led me to the guest wing where I'd be staying. The halls were lined with portraits, smiling faces of the Sterling family through the decades. But every smile looked like it had been practiced for a camera, not lived. When we passed one picture, I paused. It was her, the daughter. Dark hair, light eyes, beauty that didn't seem real. She wasn't smiling in the photo either. The butler noticed my stare and said quietly, "That was taken the day before her mother died." That night, I couldn't sleep. The mansion was silent, too silent, like it held its breath waiting for something terrible or miraculous to happen. I thought about the absurdity of it all, a man like me, paid to fix the one thing money couldn't. But something about her photo stayed with me. There was pain there, yes, but also something else. A plea. I told myself it was just a job, a week's work, a big paycheck, maybe even a story to tell on stage someday. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't a comedy gig. It was a rescue mission disguised as one. The next morning, I was supposed to meet her for the first time. The butler knocked on my door just as the sun broke through the fog. "Miss Sterling will see you now," he said. And as I followed him down the long corridor toward the closed door at the end, something inside me whispered that laughter wasn't what she needed from me. Not really. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't hired to make her laugh. I was hired to save her. She sat there like a statue, beautiful, breathing, but completely lifeless. The butler led me down a long hallway lined with glass cases, each one holding artifacts that probably cost more than my entire life. The silence inside that house felt different that morning. Not empty, but tense, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to break. My footsteps echoed against marble and memory until we stopped outside a door at the far end. He gave a small nod before opening it. The room wasn't what I expected. It wasn't another display of wealth. It was small, sunlit, and alive with color. Paintings leaned half-finished against the wall, sketches scattered across a table, a piano by the window coated with a fine layer of dust. But what caught my breath was her, Ava Sterling. She sat on the edge of a cream sofa, one leg tucked under the other, staring at a blank canvas across the room. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting her face in soft gold, but she didn't seem to notice. Her beauty wasn't loud. It was the kind that sneaks up on you and leaves you unsure if you're supposed to look away. Dark brown hair fell around her shoulders in loose waves, and her skin was almost too pale, like she hadn't seen the world outside those walls in a long time. Her eyes, gray with a hint of blue, were the kind of eyes that once held laughter but now carried its ghost. I'd stood in front of audiences before, drunk and hostile, but somehow standing there before her was harder. She didn't even look up when the butler introduced me. "Miss Sterling, this is Mr. Ethan Cole. He'll be spending some time here this week." Her response was silence. Not cold, not angry, just hollow. The butler excused himself, and I was left in the kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat sound rude. I took a slow breath, forced a smile, and said the only thing that came to mind. "So, your dad hired me to make you laugh. No pressure, right?" "Nothing. Not even a flicker." I tried again. "Do you want to hear a joke about billionaires?" That got her to glance up, but only for a second. "I don't like jokes about money," she said softly. Her voice was gentle but firm, every word perfectly measured, as if she'd learned to control how much emotion escaped with each syllable. "Fair enough," I replied, shifting awkwardly. "How about dogs? Everyone likes dogs." "I don't have one." "Cats?" "No." I rubbed the back of my neck, suddenly aware of how out of place I looked. Cheap shoes on expensive carpet. A man whose whole life had been laughter standing in front of someone who had forgotten what it was. I tried 3 more jokes, each one dying in the air before it reached her. Every failed punchline felt heavier than the last. She didn't roll her eyes or groan. She just looked through me, as if she wasn't in the room at all. Finally, I sat down in the chair opposite her, exhaled, and dropped the act. "You know," I said quietly, "I've bombed on stage before, but never this bad." That made her blink. Not quite a reaction, but something. "Do you always talk this much?" she asked without looking at me. "Only when I'm terrified," I answered, trying to sound casual. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not a smile, but close enough to give me hope. For a moment, the silence didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt fragile. My eyes wandered to the piano. "Do you play?" I asked. "I used to." "Why'd you stop?" She hesitated, then said, "Because music is supposed to make you feel something. I stopped when I realized I couldn't." The words hung in the air like a confession. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. Sometimes silence is the only language that doesn't lie. A painting on the easel caught my attention, half-finished, dark strokes over a stormy sea. At the edge, faintly sketched, was a woman's face. I pointed at it. "She's beautiful." "Who is she?" Ava's hands tightened in her lap. "My mother." The way she said it, quiet, clipped, told me not to ask more, but I couldn't help noticing the resemblance. Same eyes, same grace, the same ache of someone who carried the world on her shoulders until it broke her. For the next hour, I tried again and again to reach her, not with jokes, but with conversation. We talked about everything and nothing, books, art, the weather. But no matter what I said, she remained on the other side of some invisible wall, listening but never letting me in. Eventually, she stood. "I think that's enough for today." "Already?" I asked. "You're trying too hard," she said, walking towards the window. "Laughter doesn't come from effort. It comes from truth." Her reflection looked back at me through the glass. Her face calm, eyes unfathomable. "You don't have to fix me, Mr. Cole. You're wasting your time." Her words hit harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. I wanted to say something. Anything. But before I could, she picked up a photograph from the windowsill. It was framed in silver, the glass cracked down the middle. "This was taken 3 years ago," she said quietly. "The last time I smiled." The photo showed her with her mother, both laughing, faces bright with joy. And now, the same woman stood before me looking like she'd been carved from the memory of that moment. When she placed the picture back down, I noticed a faint scar just beneath her wrist. Thin, pale, almost hidden. She caught me looking and quickly pulled her sleeve down. "It's nothing," she said. But it wasn't nothing. It was a story she wasn't ready to tell. The air between us thickened again, the kind that holds more unspoken words than spoken ones. I tried one last time to lighten it. "You know, I once had a heckler who told me I wasn't funny enough to make a ghost laugh. You're proving him right." That earned me something small, not laughter, not even a smile, but a single sharp inhale, like she almost forgot she wasn't supposed to react. Then she turned to me fully for the first time. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief second, the room seemed to lose air. There was so much pain in them it almost felt wrong to look. "You should go," she said softly. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," she whispered, looking past me toward the door. "I just don't want you to make the same mistake my father did." I frowned, confused. "And what mistake was that?" She turned her gaze back to the painting, the storm, the unfinished face, and her voice dropped to a near whisper. trying to bring the dead back to life. Her words hit like a cold wind through an open door. Before I could speak, she walked out, leaving me alone with her silence and the sound of a piano key that pressed itself under her departing hand. One note, lonely and broken, hanging in the air long after she was gone. When she finally spoke, her words weren't laughter. They were a warning. Some houses echo with memories. This one echoed with silence. The Sterling mansion wasn't just big. It was endless. Hallways stretched like they were afraid to end. Rooms stood fully furnished but untouched. And everywhere I went, there was that same haunting quiet. I'd performed in comedy clubs where the audience hated me, but this kind of silence was worse. It wasn't empty. It was mourning. During my second day there, I started to notice things I'd missed before. The fine cracks along the marble staircase, the way the lights dimmed earlier than they should, the faint smell of roses that lingered even though I never saw a single flower in the house. Every inch of that place was perfect, yet somehow it felt like something had died inside it, and no one dared to move the body. Mr. Sterling appeared that morning, the man who'd hired me. He entered the breakfast room like a storm that had forgotten how to make thunder. Tailored suit, silver, cufflinks, posture straight as regret. His face looked like it had been carved from discipline and loss. "Mr. Cole," he said, his tone more command than greeting. "Progress?" I set down my coffee, choosing my words carefully. "Your daughter's not easy to reach." He nodded once, slow and unsurprised. "She wasn't always like that. I can tell." He poured himself a drink, whiskey at 9 in the morning, and looked out the window toward the garden where Ava sat beneath a sycamore tree, sketching in silence. "Her mother died 3 years ago. Car accident. They were together that night. Ava survived." The words hung heavy in the air. "She blames herself?" I asked quietly. "She blames the world," he replied. "And me." When he turned back to me, I saw something in his eyes that money couldn't hide. Fear. The kind that doesn't come from losing control, but from realizing control was never enough to begin with. "I've given her everything," he continued. "Therapists, doctors, trips, tutors. None of it worked. She doesn't need sympathy. She needs to remember how to live. That's what you're here for." I wanted to tell him that laughter couldn't fix grief, that I was a comedian, not a healer. But one look at him, the billionaire who could buy the world and still couldn't buy back his daughter's smile, and I kept my mouth shut. That afternoon, I found myself wandering the west wing of the mansion, the part Ava rarely entered. It was there I began to see the truth behind the house's perfection. Every painting on the wall was of her mother. Dozens of them, oil portraits, charcoal sketches, even one done in watercolor. Some professional, some clearly painted by Ava herself. In one, her mother's smile was bright and alive. In another, the same face looked faded, blurred, as if the memory itself was slipping away. I stopped before the grand piano, the same one from her room, only larger, polished, waiting. On the stand sat a piece of sheet music. The title read, "For Ava." A note scribbled at the bottom said, "Practice makes joy." I could almost picture it, a mother's laughter filling the air, a little girl's fingers stumbling over the keys, her father standing by the door pretending not to watch because love embarrassed him. But that laughter had been replaced by silence, and silence was a heavy thing to live with. Later, I found Ava again in the garden, still drawing. She looked up briefly as I approached but didn't speak. Her sketchpad was filled with faces, all variations of the same woman. Some smiling, some crying, one half finished with no mouth at all. "You're good," I said. "I used to be better." "Art's not about perfection," I offered, sitting on the bench beside her. "It's about honesty." She glanced at me, unimpressed. "Is that what your jokes are? Honest?" "Sometimes. Mostly they're defense mechanisms." Faint flicker of amusement crossed her face. Barely visible, but there. You joke because you're hiding something? I shrugged. Everyone hides something. I just do it with better timing. That earned me the smallest curve of her lips. Not a full smile, but the shadow of one. It felt like progress. We sat there for a while, just listening to the wind rustling through the trees. Eventually, I asked, "Do you ever talk about her? Your mom?" Her pencil froze. Talking doesn't change anything. No, but sometimes it helps carry the weight. She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. It doesn't make it lighter. It just reminds you it's still there. The conversation ended there, but her words stuck with me the rest of the day. That night, I walked through the mansion again, the kind of restless wandering that happens when your thoughts won't sit still. I passed the gallery of portraits again and noticed something I hadn't before. One frame missing from the wall, a faint rectangle of cleaner wallpaper marking where it used to hang. I followed the trail of subtle emptiness until I found a locked door at the end of the hall. Behind it, faint music played. Piano. The sound was uneven, hesitant. Notes stumbled over one another like a memory being relearned. I pressed my ear to the wood and closed my eyes. She was playing. Ava. The melody was haunting, a lullaby half forgotten, half remembered. There was beauty in its brokenness, the same way grief can be beautiful when it's honest. I wanted to knock, to tell her that it was okay to feel, that laughter could wait. But something told me to leave her to the music. As I turned to go, I saw movement at the end of the hall, her father standing in the shadows, watching through the slightly ajar door. His face was unreadable, but when the final note faltered and fell into silence, he closed his eyes. For the first time, he looked human. The next morning he was gone on business, as the butler explained. That seemed to be his way of avoiding emotions, disappearing into meetings and money whenever things got too real. I spent the day trying new approaches with Ava. No jokes this time. Instead, I asked her to teach me how to paint. She rolled her eyes, but handed me a brush anyway. I painted a tree that looked more like a broom, and she laughed. A real, fleeting laugh that slipped out before she could stop it. "Don't tell my father," she said quickly. "He'll think you're actually helping." That was the first time I saw light in her eyes. Faint, fragile, but there. It didn't last long, but it was enough to remind me why I'd come. Maybe laughter wasn't about fixing people. Maybe it was about giving them permission to remember they were still alive. That night, I sat by my window, thinking about the day. Somewhere down the hall, the faint sound of the piano returned. But this time, it wasn't music I heard. It was crying, muffled, broken, hidden behind those heavy doors. And that was the moment I realized something terrifying. I wasn't there to make her laugh. I was there to stop her from breaking completely. That night, I heard her crying through the walls and realized laughter wasn't her cure. It was her escape. It takes one broken soul to recognize another. It had been 4 days since I first walked into the Sterling mansion, and by then, I'd learned to read its rhythms. The way silence moved like a shadow, the way voices never rose above a whisper, and the way every sound seemed to echo longer than it should, as if even the walls refused to let go of what they'd heard. But that morning felt different. The air was softer, lighter, like the house itself had exhaled for the first time in years. Ava was in the garden again, sketching beneath the sycamore tree where sunlight fell in broken stripes through the leaves. She didn't look up when I approached, but this time, she didn't ask me to leave either. That was progress in her language. "Still drawing?" I asked, sitting a few feet away. "Still talking?" she replied without looking up. "I can stop," I offered. "Then it would be too quiet." The answer was small, but it carried more warmth than any of her words before. I leaned back, letting the moment stretch. She was sketching a horse, or what might have been one. The lines were messy, not her usual precision. "It's not finished," she said when she noticed me staring. "Neither am I," I answered. That earned me the faintest flicker of amusement. Her mouth almost curved upward, like her face had forgotten how to do it and was just relearning. But then it faded, swallowed by whatever ghosts lived behind her calm. After a while, I said quietly, "Can I tell you something? No jokes, no act." She glanced at me cautiously, but didn't stop me, which was permission enough. "I wasn't always this desperate," I began. "I used to believe I was going somewhere. Comedy was supposed to be my ticket out of debt, out of loneliness, out of being nobody. I had a partner once, Claire. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. We were engaged, broke, happy in a way only dreamers can be." Ava's pencil stopped moving. "What happened?" she asked softly. "She got sick," I said, "and I thought I could make her better if I just worked harder, more gigs, more money. I missed her last show at the hospital because I was performing for 10 drunk strangers who didn't even laugh. She died before I got back. I didn't tell a joke for a year after that. Every time I tried, it felt like I was cheating her." The silence that followed was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was heavy with understanding. Ava looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as a performer, not as her father's hire, but as someone who understood loss from the inside out. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice almost breaking. "Don't be. That's life, right? It breaks you just enough to make you real." She looked down at her sketchbook again, tracing the outline of the horse's mane. "My mother used to say something similar," she murmured. "She said pain was proof that we were still alive. I told her that was a terrible thing to say. She laughed and said, 'Then you're lucky, Ava. You haven't learned it yet.'" Her eyes lifted to mine. Now I know what she meant. I wanted to say something comforting, but comfort felt dishonest. Instead, I just nodded, letting the truth settle between us like dust. Then something remarkable happened. She smiled. It wasn't big or dramatic, just a small, fragile curve of her lips that looked like sunlight breaking through a long winter. But it was real, pure, unforced. It caught me so off guard that I forgot to breathe. "There," I said quietly. "You just did it." "Did what?" "Smiled?" She touched her lips unconsciously, as if she didn't believe me. Then she looked away, embarrassed but lighter somehow. "Don't tell him," she said. "Your father?" "Yes. He'll think it means I'm fixed." The bitterness in her tone wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. "He doesn't understand that some things can't be fixed." "Maybe he's just scared," I said. "He's not scared," she whispered. "He's guilty." Before I could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching footsteps cut through the moment. We turned to see Jonathan Sterling striding toward us, his polished shoes crunching over the gravel path. He looked immaculate as always, every inch the billionaire who'd built his empire on precision. But his eyes, sharp and calculating, softened for the briefest second when they landed on Ava. It was the look of a man who wanted to love, but didn't know how. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice even. "Mr. Cole, Ava." Ava stiffened immediately, her guard snapping back into place like armor. The warmth from seconds ago vanished. She closed her sketchbook and stood. "I was just finishing," she said quickly. Her father's gaze flicked between us. "No, please, don't let me interrupt. I only came to see how things were progressing." I forced a light tone. "Progressing better than my last show, I think." He didn't smile. His attention remained fixed on his daughter. "Ava, I heard you playing last night." Her posture faltered. "You were listening?" "I always listen," he said simply. "You played your mother's song." Something tightened in her expression. Not anger, not grief, but something deeper. "I was remembering her," she said quietly. "I'm glad," he said, but his tone betrayed no emotion. "She would want you to keep living." Ava's lips trembled, and before I could stop it, I saw her retreat, not physically but emotionally, vanishing behind those invisible walls again. "I have things to do," she said, walking past him without looking back. Sterling watched her go, jaw clenched, eyes hardening with something that looked almost like pain, but twisted into control before it could show. When she disappeared into the mansion, he turned to me. "What did you say to her?" Nothing, I replied honestly. We just talked. About what? About being human. He didn't like that answer. You're paid to make her laugh, not reminisce. With all due respect, Mr. Sterling, I said, trying to keep my tone respectful. You can't buy laughter without giving her something real first. It's not a product. It's connection. His eyes narrowed, the air between us shifting. And you think you've connected with her? I think I made her smile, I said quietly. He froze. For a heartbeat, I expected him to be relieved, even happy. But instead, something dark flashed across his face. His voice dropped, colder now. She smiled? Yes. He turned away, pacing once, twice, before facing me again. You will not mention that to anyone. Do you understand? Sir, I thought that's what you wanted. What I want, he cut in sharply, is control. If she smiled, then it means she's remembering. And some things are better left buried. I didn't understand what he meant, not fully, but there was fear in his tone. Not for her, but of her. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You think you're helping her. You're not. You're stirring up ghosts. Ghosts? I repeated. He leaned in, his gaze sharp enough to slice through me. You don't know what she's capable of when she remembers. And just like that, he turned and walked back toward the mansion, leaving me standing in the garden with more questions than answers. That night, the house returned to its usual silence. But it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the silence of something waiting to happen. I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words. You don't know what she's capable of. But all I could think about was that smile, small, fleeting, fragile, the first glimpse of life I'd seen in her since I arrived. It was worth every failed joke, every sleepless night, every awkward silence. It was priceless. And somewhere deep down, I knew he was right about one thing. That smile had changed everything. That smile was worth a fortune, and he was ready to pay any price to take it back. He didn't want her to heal. He wanted her to stay broken, because guilt was his control. By the end of my first week in the Sterling mansion, the rhythm of that house had changed. The silence that once felt suffocating now trembled under the weight of something new. Laughter. Not much of it, not constant, but real. Ava had started to talk more, ask questions, tease me lightly when I painted terribly, or tripped over her father's priceless rugs. For the first time, I'd heard her laugh, soft and genuine, and it startled both of us. But for Jonathan Sterling, that sound wasn't healing. It was rebellion. He called me to his study the next morning. The room looked like a courtroom disguised as a library. Rows of leather-bound books, a mahogany desk polished to perfection, and light filtering through blinds like prison bars across the floor. He didn't offer me a seat. You're overstepping, he said. Overstepping? I repeated, confused. I hired you for a reason, to help her, not to change her. I thought that was the same thing. He set his glass down with a sharp clink. You don't understand my daughter. You think because you've made her laugh once or twice, you've accomplished something. But you're playing with fire. I held his stare. With all due respect, sir, if laughter is dangerous here, maybe the problem isn't her. His expression hardened. This isn't a debate, Mr. Cole. I've seen what happens when she feels too much. I will not have her unravel again. There it was. That word again. Unravel. Like she was a project that came apart at the seams instead of a person trying to heal. I wanted to ask what he meant, but his tone made it clear this conversation was over before it began. He leaned forward, voice low. Do your job, Mr. Cole. Make her laugh if you must, but don't make her remember. Remember what? Leave it alone. The finality in his voice chilled me. I left the study with my pulse hammering and my thoughts tangled. That afternoon, I found Ava in the music room. She was sitting at the piano again, fingers hovering above the keys, but not pressing down. I hesitated at the door, not wanting to interrupt whatever fragile moment she was building. But she glanced back and smiled faintly. You can come in, she said. I didn't want to scare away the music. It already left, she replied softly. I sat beside her on the piano bench. Then maybe we can find it again. She tilted her head toward me. You always talk like you're writing a book. Occupational hazard, I said, grinning. Comedians are just failed poets who got tired of crying. That earned me another laugh, quiet but unmistakable. She covered her mouth as if she didn't trust herself to let it out completely. You're ridiculous, she said. True? But you smiled again. I did, she admitted. And it felt strange, like stretching muscles I didn't know still worked. That's how healing starts. A little awkward, a little painful, but it means you're alive. Her eyes softened. You really believe that? I have to, I said. Otherwise, I'm just a guy telling jokes into the dark. We spent the rest of the afternoon playing an off-key duet. She taught me a few simple notes, and I pretended to be terrible at it just to make her laugh. Every time she smiled, the mansion seemed less haunted, as if her laughter pushed the ghosts back into their corners. But that evening, something shifted again. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. Jonathan Sterling sat at the head of the long dining table, cutting his steak with the precision of a surgeon. Ava sat beside me, her mood brighter than usual, even playful. She told a story about the house cat that used to terrorize the gardeners, and when she laughed at her own memory, I saw her father's hand pause mid-cut. His knife stopped, but his expression didn't change. He lifted his gaze slowly toward her, and though he said nothing, the air grew heavier. When she noticed, the laughter drained from her face. I didn't mean to, she started, but he interrupted quietly. It's good to see you. Spirited, he said. But there was no warmth in it, only caution. Ava nodded and went back to eating in silence. I looked between them, unsettled. After dinner, she excused herself early, retreating to her room. Sterling remained at the table, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. When the butler left, he spoke without looking at me. She reminds you of someone, doesn't she? The question caught me off guard. What? You lost someone, he said, still not looking up. I can see it in the way you talk to her, the way you listen. Maybe that's why I can help her, I said cautiously. He chuckled, a humorless sound. Help her? You think she needs help? She's hurting. So am I, he snapped, finally meeting my eyes. But no one hired a comedian for me. The bitterness in his tone was sharp, but underneath it was something else. Guilt. Thick and suffocating. She doesn't need saving, Mr. Cole, he continued, voice calmer now. She needs protecting, and I'm the only one who knows how to do that. I leaned forward slightly. Protecting from what? He studied me for a long moment before saying, from herself. There it was. The sentence that tied every strange reaction, every unspoken fear, every contradiction in this house together. But before I could ask anything more, he stood and left, his footsteps echoing through the marble halls. I stayed seated for a while, the weight of his words pressing against me. From herself. What did that mean? What could she possibly have done to make her own father afraid of her happiness? Later that night, I walked past the art room and saw the light still on. Ava was there, painting again, her focus so intense that she didn't hear me approach. She looked peaceful, almost childlike, her fingers smudged with color, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. What are you working on? I asked softly. She smiled without turning. You'll see. I watched her for a while, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, the gentle sway of her body as she painted to an invisible rhythm. For the first time, I saw life returning to her in real time. When she finally stepped back, she gestured towards the canvas. It was a portrait, not of her mother this time, but of a man. Me. The painting wasn't finished, but my likeness was unmistakable, softer, warmer, almost idealized. I didn't mean for it to look like you, she said quickly, embarrassed. It just happened. I smiled. It's beautiful. She met my gaze, her voice small but sincere. You make the house feel less heavy. That single line hit deeper than any compliment I'd ever received. It wasn't just gratitude. It was trust. We stood there in the soft glow of lamplight, surrounded by her mother's old paintings, and for the first time, the mansion didn't feel like a tomb. It felt alive again. But then, a sound. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. I turned sharply toward the door, catching a glimpse of a shadow retreating. Someone had been standing there watching. Ava frowned. "What is it?" "Nothing," I said quickly, not wanting to alarm her. But my pulse was racing. I stepped into the hall, glancing left and right. The corridor was empty, silent, but the faint scent of Sterling's cologne still lingered in the air. He'd been there, watching. I went back into the art room, forcing a smile. "It's late," I said gently. "You should rest." She nodded, wiping her hands on a rag. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Ava." I waited until she disappeared down the hallway, then turned off the lamp and stepped into the dark corridor myself. That's when I saw it. A reflection in the glass display case across the hall. Jonathan Sterling, standing in the shadows near the staircase, watching me. Watching us. Our eyes met for a single, silent second before he turned away, his expression cold, unreadable. But it wasn't the look of a father protecting his daughter. It was the look of a man guarding a secret. That night, I caught him watching us from the hallway. And his eyes weren't those of a father. He slid an envelope across the table, triple the money to walk away. By the time the second week came around, the mansion no longer felt like a stranger's home. I knew which floorboards creaked before dawn, where the morning light fell across the kitchen tiles, and how the smell of coffee drifted down the hall like a promise. I'd learned that Ava preferred to paint in silence until noon, that she hummed when she forgot I was there, and that every now and then she laughed, really laughed, like someone who was just remembering how to live again. But for Jonathan Sterling, her laughter wasn't healing. It was a threat. He called me to his study that evening. The butler didn't meet my eyes when he told me. That was my first warning. The second came when I walked in and saw the look on Sterling's face. There was no pretense of politeness this time, only control, cold and calculated. The heavy curtains were drawn, muting the late-day sun, and the only light came from a single, brass lamp that made everything feel like an interrogation. "Sit," he said, motioning to the chair opposite his desk. I obeyed, though my pulse quickened. He poured himself a drink but didn't offer me one. His movements were deliberate, efficient, the same way a man might handle dangerous machinery. "You've done what I asked," he began evenly. "Ava is laughing again. You've proven yourself effective." I waited for the but. He slid an envelope across the table. Cream paper, unmarked, thick enough that I could feel the weight of what was inside even before I touched it. "Your payment," he said. "And more. Triple your original fee." I stared at it, not understanding. "You're paying me early?" "No." His voice was quiet, too quiet. "I'm paying you to leave." The words landed like a punch. "I don't understand," I said finally. "You've done your job. You've succeeded where doctors and therapists failed. For that, I'm grateful." He took a slow sip of his drink. "But your continued presence here is unnecessary. It's time for you to go." I leaned back, my mind spinning. Did Ava say something? He set down his glass, his eyes narrowing. "My daughter's feelings are not your concern. With respect, sir, if she's the reason I'm here, then she is my concern." His jaw tightened. "Mr. Cole, I know your situation. I know about your debts, your failed shows, the eviction notice on your apartment. I know what kind of desperation drives a man to accept work without asking too many questions. Take the money, start over." He said it like a mercy, but it felt like a threat. I looked down at the envelope. I could already imagine what was inside. Enough cash to pay off every bill, enough to buy time, maybe even a new beginning. For a man who'd spent years scraping by on tips and false promises, it was the kind of offer that could erase everything. But that's what made it dangerous. "Why now?" I asked quietly. You wanted her to laugh again. She's laughing. Isn't that what you wanted? His gaze darkened. You don't understand what that laughter means. Then explain it to me. He rose from his chair, walking to the window. The faint reflection of the lamp gleamed off the glass, distorting his face. When she laughs, she remembers. And when she remembers, she breaks. He turned back to me. 3 years ago, after her mother's death, Ava tried to take her own life. I found her. I saved her. Since then, I've made it my mission to keep her safe, even if that means keeping her. Still, the silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. You think you're protecting her, I said slowly, but you're keeping her prisoner. He didn't deny it. I can't lose her again, he said, and for the first time, I heard fear beneath the steel. Every smile she gives you brings her closer to the edge of what destroyed her. You're wrong, I said. She's not breaking. She's healing. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said softly, Healing looks a lot like falling in love, doesn't it? The words stopped me cold. I see the way she looks at you, he continued. Do you think I'd let another man walk in here and take what's left of my family? I know the signs, Mr. Cole. I know infatuation when I see it, in her eyes and in yours. My chest tightened, because as much as I wanted to deny it, I couldn't. What I felt for Ava wasn't professional anymore. Somewhere between her silence and her laughter, between the loneliness of that mansion and the fragile beauty of her smile, something inside me had shifted. I don't want her money, I said quietly. I just want her to have a life. Sterling's voice turned to ice. And I'm telling you she can't. Not with you. He pushed the envelope closer, the edge scraping against the wood. Take it, and leave tonight. You'll never have to struggle again. But if you stay, understand that everything you think you're doing for her will destroy her. I looked at the envelope again, at the life it promised, the rent I could pay, the debts I could clear, the future I could finally afford. And then I thought of Ava, the way her laughter sounded when she forgot to guard it, the way she painted like she was rebuilding the world one color at a time, the way she looked at me like she saw through the mess and didn't flinch. I pushed the envelope back across the table. No. Sterling's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered, something between surprise and anger. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said. But it's my mistake. He leaned forward, his tone almost a whisper now. You think this is noble? That staying makes you the hero? You have no idea what you're walking into. You think she's fragile. She's not. She's dangerous. That word again. Dangerous. I stood, my hands trembling slightly but my voice steady. She's not dangerous. She's hurting, and you're using your guilt as a cage. His jaw clenched so tightly I could hear the faint grind of his teeth. You don't know anything about guilt. You're right, I said, stepping closer. But I know what it's like to love someone who's dying inside and not be able to save them, and I'll be damned if I watch it happen again. He stared at me, his eyes cold but burning underneath. Then, slowly, deliberately, he picked up the envelope, opened it, and took out a check. He slid it toward me again. Last chance, he said. That's $500,000. Walk away, Mr. Cole. My breath caught. The weight of that number pressed against every part of me that had ever been poor, desperate, or broken. $500,000. More than I'd ever make in 10 lifetimes of jokes. He watched me closely, knowing exactly what he was doing, dangling salvation in front of a starving man. I picked up the check. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I stared at it for a long moment, not at the numbers, but at what they represented. Comfort, escape, freedom from every mistake that had led me here. Then I tore it in half. The sound was sharp in the quiet room, a clean rip that echoed like defiance. Sterling didn't move. His expression didn't falter. He just watched me, the faintest glimmer of something unreadable flickering across his face. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. Not a kind smile. Not even an amused one. It was cold, slow, unsettling. The kind of smile that comes from someone who's already 3 moves ahead of you in a game you didn't know you were playing. Very well, he said softly. You've made your choice. Let's hope she survives it. I turned to leave, but his final words followed me out the door. You should have taken the money, Mr. Cole, he called after me. It was the last honest thing I was ever going to offer you. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the torn halves of the check still in my hand. My heart raced with something that wasn't regret. It was fear, because deep down, I knew that smile meant the game had changed. And this time the stakes weren't money. They were us. I tore up the check, and that's when he smiled for the first time. Every time she laughed, I could hear the sound of something breaking inside her. The days that followed were quieter but heavier, like the calm before a storm that everyone could sense but no one dared to mention. Sterling barely spoke to me anymore, and when he did, it was all clipped orders disguised as courtesy. But Ava, she was different. The walls she'd built around herself had started to crack. Her laughter, once rare and uncertain, began slipping out more easily now. Yet each time it did, I could feel something beneath it, sorrow wearing the mask of joy. That morning, I found her by the lake behind the mansion. The surface was still, a mirror of gray sky and drifting clouds, the kind of scene you'd see in paintings meant to calm people, but only made me uneasy. She was sitting on the old wooden dock, bare feet grazing the water, her hair loose and catching the wind. For a moment, she looked like someone free, until you noticed the way her hands gripped the edges of the dock, like she was afraid the world might take her with it if she let go. I sat down beside her without saying a word. She didn't turn, but she didn't ask me to leave either. Do you ever feel like the world just stopped? She asked finally, her voice barely louder than the wind. Stopped how? Like everyone else kept living, but you got left behind, trapped in the same day that never ends. I thought of Claire, of hospital rooms that smelled like antiseptic and regret. Yeah, I said quietly. I know that day. She turned to me, her eyes soft but distant. I used to think if I just stopped feeling, the pain would stop too. That if I kept everything quiet, the memories would fade. Did it work? For a while, she said. Until you showed up. I almost smiled. I have that effect on people. I'm like an emotional fire alarm. That earned a small laugh. Soft and genuine, but followed by silence that felt too deep. She stared out at the lake again. The night my mother died, she was driving to meet me. We'd had an argument earlier that day. Stupid things. She wanted me to leave art school to work with my father. I told her I'd rather starve than become another Sterling. She told me I was being childish. I told her she didn't understand what it meant to feel trapped. Her voice cracked. She called me from the road, said she was sorry, said she loved me, and I hung up before she finished. The pause that followed was a living thing, breathing between us. She never made it home, she whispered. Her car went off the bridge near town. The police said it was the rain, slick roads, bad timing. But I know better. She was crying. Because of me. She wrapped her arms around herself, her body trembling though the wind was warm. It wasn't your fault, I said gently. She shook her head. My father doesn't believe that. He blames me. He doesn't say it out loud, but I see it. Every time he looks at me, he sees her. He keeps me here because I'm the punishment he chose to live with. Her words hit me harder than I expected. That's not love, Ava. She looked at me, eyes glistening. I don't think he knows what love is anymore. We sat in silence, the sound of water lapping against the dock. I wanted to reach for her hand, but didn't. It didn't feel right, not yet. Instead, I said softly, "What about you? Do you still paint because of her?" "I paint because it's the only way I can talk to her now." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "Funny, right? My father brought you here to make me laugh, and I only laugh when I'm talking about the things that hurt." Sometimes that's the only kind that matters, I said. The kind that breaks something open. She turned her face toward me, the wind brushing strands of hair across her cheeks. There was something in her eyes, a look that wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition. I think that's why I like you, Ethan, she said softly. You don't try to fix me, you just sit here. That's because I'm not good at fixing things, I said. I just try not to make them worse. She smiled again, faint but real. We stayed like that for a long time. Two broken people pretending the world could pause long enough to let them breathe. When she finally reached out and let her fingers brush against mine, I didn't move away. Her hand was warm, trembling slightly. I used to think laughter was something you earned, she whispered, like you had to deserve it after everything went wrong. But now I think it's just surviving. You laugh because if you don't, you'll drown. I looked at her, the way the sunlight caught her hair, the way pain and beauty coexisted in her face like twin reflections. You're not drowning anymore, I said. Then why does it still hurt? She asked. Because you're healing. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned her head lightly on my shoulder. The contact was barely there, but it was enough to send my heart racing. I didn't move. I didn't want to break the moment. After a while, she said, almost to herself, "You make it easier to breathe here." I wanted to tell her that she did the same for me, that somewhere between her pain and her courage, I'd found something worth believing in again. But the words felt too heavy, too final, so I just said, "I'm not going anywhere." She didn't respond right away. Then, slowly, she lifted her head and looked at me. Not with sadness this time, but something deeper, quieter, like a decision forming behind her eyes. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I've never told anyone." My pulse quickened. "Okay." She hesitated, then said, "The night my mother died, she wasn't alone in the car." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "There was someone else, a man, my father's business partner." Her voice trembled. "I found out months later by accident. They said he died too, but there were rumors that he didn't, that my father made sure of it." I stared at her, stunned. "You think your father—" "I don't know," she whispered. "But ever since that night, he's been different. He keeps secrets. He keeps me here. And sometimes, I think he's afraid I'll remember something I'm not supposed to." The realization hit like a cold wave. "You think your father had something to do with your mother's death?" She didn't answer. Her eyes darted toward the house. The windows glinted in the distance, reflecting the lake. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching. "I shouldn't have told you," she said suddenly, her voice breaking. "He'll know. He always knows. Ava—" She stood abruptly, backing away. "Promise me something," she said, her tone urgent now. "If anything happens, if he tells you to leave again, don't argue, just go." "I'm not leaving you," I said firmly. She shook her head, tears welling. "You don't understand. My father doesn't lose. When he's scared, he destroys whatever reminds him of what he's lost. That's how he survives." Her hands trembled. "He can't stand seeing me happy, Ethan, because happiness means remembering her. And remembering her means remembering what he did." I stood too, reaching for her, but she stepped back. "I shouldn't have said any of this," she whispered. "Forget it, please." "Ava, wait!" She gave a small, hollow laugh, the kind that sounded like it hurt to make. "You wanted laughter? There it is." Then she looked at me, her eyes wide, terrified, and heartbreakingly alive. "Run, Ethan," she said softly. "Please, before it's too late." She told me one last joke, and then begged me to run before it was too late. Even the richest man in the world can't buy forgiveness. The next few days felt like living inside a ticking clock. Every moment too quiet, every shadow too long. After Ava's warning, nothing in the Sterling mansion felt safe anymore. The staff avoided eye contact, the halls seemed colder, and Jonathan Sterling's presence hung in the air even when he wasn't in the room. I barely saw Ava after that night by the lake. When I asked the servants where she was, they said she'd gone to visit relatives in New York. But Ava had no relatives, not living ones anyway. I didn't believe the story, and neither did my gut. Something was wrong. The first crack came on a Thursday morning. I woke to the sound of voices downstairs, not the calm murmurs of servants, but panicked shouting. I rushed to the foyer just as a man in a dark suit brushed past me, barking into his phone. Another man followed, his badge flashing silver under the chandelier light. Federal agents. The sight made my stomach drop. Jonathan Sterling was standing at the base of the staircase, still in his robe, surrounded by men with clipboards and briefcases. His composure was perfect. Too perfect. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping closer. He looked at me once, briefly, like a man assessing whether someone was worth speaking to. "A misunderstanding," he said. "My company's finances are under routine review. Nothing that concerns you." But the look in his eyes said otherwise. Later that afternoon, every news outlet in the country was running the same story. Sterling Industries under federal investigation. Embezzlement, tax evasion, shell corporations, the works. I sat in my room, watching the headlines flash across the TV, my mind spinning. This wasn't just corporate scandal. This was a demolition. Someone was taking him down, piece by piece, and whoever it was knew exactly where to strike. The next morning, Sterling's empire began to collapse in real time. Stocks plummeted. His business partners abandoned him. Reporters camped outside the gate, their cameras flashing like lightning. But inside the mansion he remained eerily calm, moving through the chaos like a man rearranging furniture in a burning house. That calm terrified me more than the panic ever could. Around noon, he summoned me to his office. The air inside was thick with cigar smoke, and the television on the wall played muted coverage of his downfall. His tie was gone, his hair disheveled, but his posture, straight, defiant, hadn't changed. "You've been busy," he said, without looking up. "I've been watching the news like everyone else," I replied carefully. He smiled faintly, still staring at the screen. "You think this is justice, don't you? You think all this means something." I didn't say that. He turned toward me then, eyes blazing. "You didn't have to. You've been judging me since the day you walked in here." "I've been trying to understand you," I said. He laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "Understand me? You think I'm a villain in your little morality play? You have no idea what kind of world you've walked into, Mr. Cole. The things I've done weren't for greed. They were for survival." I took a step closer. "And Ava? Was she survival too?" The question hit him like a slap. His face hardened. "Careful," he warned. "Where is she?" I demanded. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small photo. Ava as a child, maybe 7 years old, sitting beside her mother on a carousel. Both smiling, alive, full of light. He stared at it for a long moment before saying softly, "Everything I ever built was for them. But you lost them anyway," I said quietly. Something flickered behind his eyes. Pain, anger, regret, before it vanished again. He slipped the photo back into the drawer and said, "You should go, Mr. Cole, before this house falls with me. I'm not leaving without her." He stood, the veneer of calm cracking for the first time. "You think you can save her? You can't even save yourself?" Before I could respond, one of his aides burst through the door, panic etched on his face. "Sir, the board has voted to remove you, effective immediately." Sterling didn't look surprised. He just nodded, dismissing the man with a flick of his hand. When the door closed again, he sank back into his chair, staring out the window. "Do you believe in karma, Mr. Cole?" he asked. "I believe people get what they deserve eventually," I said. He smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's my turn." That was the last conversation we had before everything imploded. By evening, the mansion was surrounded by news vans and black SUVs. Agents raided the offices downtown, His assets were frozen. And through it all, one thought consumed me. Where is Ava? I tried calling, texting, even reaching out to Marcus, the head of security, but no one answered. It was as if she'd vanished. Then, just after midnight, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "You're in danger, get out." No signature, no location, just those words. I threw on my jacket and started packing, but something in me hesitated. If Ava was in trouble, running wasn't an option. I had to find her. I went to her room first. The door was slightly open. Inside, the bed was made. The lights off, the air heavy with her perfume. But something on the dresser caught my eye. A folded piece of paper, torn at the edges. It was a sketch, a portrait. Me. But this time the expression was different, not smiling, not warm. My painted reflection looked afraid. And at the bottom, written in delicate script, were 3 words. "He knows everything." My chest tightened. Suddenly the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, heavy, deliberate. I froze, the paper trembling in my hand. "Mr. Cole," came Sterling's voice. Calm, controlled, too calm. I turned as he appeared in the doorway, dressed in black, a phone in one hand and a revolver in the other. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "Where is she?" I demanded. He tilted his head slightly. "You think I'd hurt her? I don't know what you're capable of anymore." He sighed, setting the gun down on a nearby table. "Neither do I." He walked past me, picked up the sketch from my hand and studied it. "She's always been too perceptive for her own good. What did you do to her?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his phone and pressed a button. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a ringtone, faint, familiar. Ava's ringtone. "She's safe," he said finally. "For now." My heart pounded. "Where?" He met my gaze, and for the first time I saw something that looked like defeat in his eyes. "You think I did all this to control her? To hurt her? But you're wrong. Everything I've done, every lie, every deal, every sin, was to protect her from what's coming." "What's coming?" He smiled faintly. "The truth." Before I could press him, his phone buzzed. He answered, listened silently for a few seconds, then hung up. When he looked at me again, his mask of composure had shattered. "It's over," he said. "Everything's gone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single envelope, smaller than the last one, but sealed just as neatly. He handed it to me. "What's this?" I asked. "An address," he said quietly. "You'll understand when you get there." I opened my mouth to ask more, but he turned away. By the time I blinked, he was already walking down the hall, his footsteps fading into the echo of an empire collapsing. The next morning, every channel screamed the same headline: Jonathan Sterling, arrest warrant issued, assets seized. The world had finally caught up to him. But before the authorities could find him, he was gone. No trace, no trail, nothing. 2 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Cole," came the voice. Sterling. His tone was strained, trembling, something I'd never heard from him before. "If you want to see her again," he said slowly, "come alone." Then the line went dead. He called me one last time, his voice shaking. "If you want to see her again, come alone." The man who once paid for laughter was now paying for redemption. The address on the envelope led me far from the world of marble floors and guarded gates out into the forgotten edges of the city, where cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights whispered of lives left behind. It was the kind of place that didn't make the news unless something terrible happened. The rain came down steady and cold, soaking through my jacket as I followed the directions to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the industrial district. Every instinct told me it was a trap, but Ava's face kept flashing through my mind. The way she'd looked when she told me to run, the tremor in her voice when she whispered that her father always knew. So I went anyway. The front door was slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of rusted metal. Light filtered through the broken windows in narrow shafts, cutting across the dark like fractured glass. And there he was. Jonathan Sterling. He looked nothing like the man I'd met weeks ago. No tailored suit, no calm composure. His hair was unkempt, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes shadowed and hollow. The billionaire had become a ghost. "You came," he said quietly, stepping forward from the shadows. "Where is she?" I demanded. He nodded toward a small office space at the far end of the warehouse. Through the cracked glass, I could see movement, the faint outline of a figure sitting on a chair, head bowed. "Ava." "She's safe," he said. "For now." I took a step toward the office, but he raised a hand. "Not yet. We need to talk first." "Talk?" I snapped. "You've lied, manipulated, and hurt the only person who ever loved you, and now you want to talk?" His voice was calm, but trembling underneath. "You don't understand what love becomes when it's poisoned by guilt." I froze. There it was again. That word. Guilt. It had followed him like a shadow since the first day I met him. "You said once that you did everything to protect her," I said. "From what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to a nearby table and picked up a dusty decanter. The glass clinked against the rim as he poured himself a drink with unsteady hands. "Do you know what it's like?" he began slowly. "To hold the person you love more than anything and know that you were the one who broke them." His voice cracked. "Her mother, my wife, wasn't supposed to be in that car. I was. We'd fought earlier that evening. She found out something. Something I did. She said she couldn't live with the lies anymore. So she left. I followed her, called her, begged her to come home. She wouldn't listen." He took a drink, his hand shaking. "The storm that night was brutal. She lost control. The car went over the bridge. They said it was the rain, but it wasn't. It was me." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "You caused the accident?" "I caused everything," he said. "I made a deal years ago. Shady investments, offshore accounts, the kind of things you can't confess to without losing everything. She found out. She was going to expose me. I told her I'd fix it, but she didn't believe me. She took Ava and left." He closed his eyes. "I called her one last time. She was crying. I begged her to pull over, to wait for me. She said, 'You can't buy forgiveness, Jonathan.' And then the line went silent." He stared at the floor, his voice barely above a whisper. "When the police pulled the car from the water, I thought I'd lost both of them. But Ava survived. My punishment was to keep living." The air between us grew heavy. "That's why you keep her locked away," I said quietly. "Because she reminds you of what you did." He nodded slowly. "Every time she laughs, I hear her mother. Every smile is another ghost I can't face." "And you brought me here," I said, realization dawning. "To fix her, or to prove you can still control something that's broken." His eyes lifted to mine, tired, hollow but sharp enough to cut. "No, Mr. Cole, I brought you here because she loves you. And if she loves you, I can't be forgiven." Before I could respond, the office door creaked open. Ava stepped out, her face pale, her eyes wide. She'd heard everything. "Is it true?" she whispered. Sterling froze. "Ava, tell me," she shouted, her voice breaking. "Did you cause it? Did you call her that night?" He took a step forward. "I was trying to stop her." "Stop her from what? From leaving you? From telling the truth?" Tears streamed down her face, anger and grief twisting her words. "All this time you made me believe she died because of me. You let me hate myself so you didn't have to hate yourself." He reached for her, but she pulled away. "I wanted to believe you loved me," she said, her voice trembling. "But you don't. You loved control. You loved being the one who decided who gets to hurt." The sound of her voice cracked something inside the room, like glass under pressure. Sterling's shoulders sagged. For the first time, he looked truly small. "You're right," he said softly. "I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to have it. You can't carry my sins anymore." Ava shook her head. "It's too late." He looked at her with hollow eyes. No, it's not. He reached into his coat pocket. My muscles tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out an envelope, the same ivory kind he'd once used to pay me off. He handed it to her with trembling hands. "What is this?" she asked warily. "Your freedom," he said. "Everything I've hidden. The accounts, the offshore funds, the evidence of what I did, it's all there. You can turn it in, clear your name, end the legacy." She hesitated, then took it. Her hands were shaking. "Why now?" "Because you deserve to live a life untouched by me." For a long moment, none of us moved. The sound of rain drummed softly on the roof, steady and relentless. Then, Sterling turned to me. His eyes were tired but resolute. "Do you believe in redemption, Mr. Cole?" "I believe in consequences," I said quietly. He almost smiled. "Same thing if you ask God." He reached into his coat again. My heart stopped. This time it was a gun. I took a step forward, but he held up a hand. "Don't," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." Ava's voice broke into a sob. "Dad, please." "I spent my whole life buying time," he said. "Buying silence, buying forgiveness. But this I can't buy." He handed the gun to me, cold metal pressing against my palm, and then a folded letter. "Give this to her after," he said. "After what?" I whispered, dread rising in my chest. He looked at his daughter one last time. "After I finally make something right." "Dad, no!" Ava screamed, running forward, but it was too late. He stepped back, closing his eyes, his lips moving in what might have been a prayer, or maybe her name. Then he handed me a letter, and a gun. Some confessions can't be spoken, only read. The letter was folded 3 times, sealed with a faint trace of wax that had smudged under his trembling hands. Even before I opened it, I could feel its weight. Not from the paper itself, but from what it carried inside. It wasn't a message. It was a final breath from a man who'd run out of ways to speak. Ava stood beside me, her hands clutching the ivory envelope he'd given her moments before. Her face was pale, hollowed by disbelief. The gun Sterling had pressed into my hand sat on the table between us, silent and gleaming beneath the warehouse lights. "Read it," she whispered. I nodded, though my throat felt dry as dust. The paper crackled softly as I unfolded it, revealing his sharp, deliberate handwriting, the kind of penmanship born of discipline and control, now fraying at the edges. It began simply. "My daughter, if you're reading this, I have already done what I could not undo. I used to believe power was the currency of life, that if a man could control his world, he could control his pain. I was wrong. Power buys silence, not peace. When your mother died, I told myself I was protecting you by keeping the truth buried. The truth, Ava, is that I buried myself alongside it. Every day since, I have walked through this house like a ghost, haunting my own life, watching you fade because I didn't have the courage to let you live. You were never to blame. Not for her death, not for my sins, not for the distance I built between us. You were the only light left in a house I turned into a tomb." The words blurred for a moment as my eyes stung. I blinked and continued. "When I hired Ethan, I didn't do it out of kindness. I did it because I wanted to see if you could still laugh. I wanted proof that I hadn't destroyed everything good in you. When I saw you smile for the first time, something inside me broke. I realized I'd made you afraid of joy, because joy meant remembering her. I wanted to stop you from hurting, but I became the pain itself. Ethan, if you're reading this with her, then know this. I brought you into our lives because I thought you could fix what I couldn't. But somewhere along the way, I realized you didn't come to fix her. You came to save her. And in doing that, you saved a part of me I thought was long dead." Ava's lips trembled as she reached out and brushed the edge of the page, as though she could touch the words that her father hadn't been brave enough to say aloud. "Keep reading," she said softly. "You asked me once why I never laugh anymore. It's because laughter reminds me of what I lost. But seeing you laugh again, It reminded me of what I still had left to protect. I know what I've done can't be forgiven. I know what I've become can't be redeemed. But I couldn't leave this world without trying to give you something back, something honest. The accounts, the documents, the evidence, they're yours now. Use them to rebuild or destroy everything I stood for. You have that power. You always did. And if the world ever tells you that you're broken, remember this. Broken things can still be beautiful. Tell your mother I finally learned that. I love you in ways my actions never showed, and I hope one day you'll forgive the man I was, if not the man I became. Dad. By the time I reached the last line, my voice had cracked. I didn't realize I'd been reading aloud until I heard Ava's sobs, quiet at first, then breaking into something raw and real. She sank to her knees, the letter clutched against her chest. I knelt beside her, my hand hovering over her shoulder, unsure whether to comfort or let her fall apart. He loved her, she whispered through tears. He loved her so much he couldn't live with it. No, I said quietly. He loved her so much he forgot how to live without her. The warehouse echoed with the hollow rhythm of rain on the tin roof. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, a deep, mournful sound that seemed to carry the weight of every word Sterling hadn't said. For a long time, neither of us moved. Then Ava stood, her face streaked with tears but her voice steady. We have to find him. I nodded. We left the letter on the table, the gun beside it, and stepped into the storm. The rain hit like shards of glass against our skin as we ran to the car. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray and silver as we drove through the city streets, following the address scribbled at the bottom of his letter. His office, the place where it had all begun. When we arrived, the building was dark. The lobby was empty, silent except for the faint hum of electricity. We took the elevator to the top floor. Every step felt heavier than the last. His office door was slightly open. The air inside smelled faintly of whiskey and rain. Papers littered the floor, scattered like the remnants of a life dismantled. The massive window behind his desk overlooked the city. Black sky fractured by lightning. "Dad?" Ava called softly, her voice echoing in the emptiness. No answer. The only light came from a single desk lamp, casting a dim glow across a half-empty glass and a framed photograph. The same carousel picture I'd seen before. Only now, there was something else beside it. His wedding ring, resting neatly on top of a folded handkerchief. "Ethan." Ava's voice was small, terrified. She pointed toward the corner of the room. That's when I saw him. Jonathan Sterling sat slumped in his chair, his body still, his face turned toward the city skyline. The revolver was on the floor beside him, one chamber empty. His eyes were open but distant, fixed on a horizon only he could see. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The sound that escaped Ava wasn't a cry. It was a sound so full of pain it barely sounded human. She stumbled forward, collapsing at his feet, clutching his motionless hand. "No. No, please, Dad." I turned away, my vision blurring, every muscle locked with grief and disbelief. Somewhere inside me, I knew he'd planned this all along. The letter wasn't just a confession. It was his final transaction, a deal with guilt, signed in ink and silence. He'd bought his peace the only way he knew how. And for the first time since I'd met him, Jonathan Sterling finally looked free. By the time we reached his office, he was already gone. Her laughter didn't sound like joy. It sounded like goodbye. The storm lasted for 3 days. Not just outside, but inside the house, inside her. The sound of rain against the glass became the rhythm of her grief, constant, hollow, unending. Jonathan Sterling's funeral was a quiet affair. No cameras, no speeches, no lavish tribute to the man the world had once worshipped. Just a handful of people standing under black umbrellas, watching a coffin disappear into the earth, while his daughter stared at the ground as though the world had stopped turning. I stayed a few steps behind her the whole time. She didn't want to speak, and I didn't ask her to. There are no words for that kind of loss. You just stay close enough to catch what breaks. When the mourners left, she lingered at the grave long after everyone else had gone. The wind tugged at her coat. Her hair whipped across her face. But she didn't move. She just stood there, motionless, staring at the name etched into the marble. Jonathan Sterling, beloved husband and father. The irony hung heavy between us. Finally, she whispered, "He wasn't either of those things." Her voice cracked halfway through, but she didn't cry. It was as if she'd run out of tears somewhere between the letter and the gunshot. I stepped forward, wanting to say something, anything, but the look she gave me stopped me cold. "I don't know how to forgive him," she said softly. "And I hate that part of me still wants to." "You don't have to forgive him," I said. "You just have to stop letting him decide who you are." She turned toward me then, pale, hollow-eyed, but alive. "I don't even know who that is anymore." "Then we'll find out," I said. "Together." That was the first time her hand reached for mine, not out of fear or desperation, but something quieter. Trust. We left the cemetery as the clouds began to part, streaks of sunlight breaking through like fragile promises. Neither of us spoke on the drive home. The radio played some slow, aching song that made her flinch every time a piano note fell. When we reached the mansion, she hesitated at the front door. "I don't want to go in there," she said quietly. "Then don't," I told her. "It's just a building. We'll stay somewhere else." And we did. We found a small cottage on the edge of the Sterling estate, a forgotten guest house where dust coated the furniture and ivy climbed the windows. It was peaceful in a way the main house never was. I cleaned the fireplace while she unpacked her sketchbooks and paints. The first night, she barely spoke. The second, she painted until dawn. By the third, she started humming again, softly, almost afraid the sound might break something sacred. Grief, I learned, doesn't disappear. It changes shape. It moves in, rearranges the furniture, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it leaves enough space for light to find its way back in. Every morning we'd walk by the lake. She still avoided the bridge. But one afternoon, she stopped halfway down the path and stared at the water, at the same dock where we'd sat weeks before when she first told me the truth. "I used to think this place was cursed," she said. "Now I think it's just haunted." "By him?" I asked. She shook her head. "By me." She sat down on the edge of the dock, pulling her knees to her chest. "You know, he said he wanted me to laugh again before he—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "I don't know how to feel about that. Part of me thinks it's beautiful. The other part thinks it's cruel. Maybe it's both," I said. "Most truths are." She looked at me then, eyes wet but steady. "Do you ever feel guilty for surviving?" "Every day," I said. "But I've learned that surviving isn't the same as living. And you're still learning how to live." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "And you're still trying to make me laugh." "Old habits," I said. "Occupational hazard." She let out a faint sound, halfway between a sigh and a laugh. It wasn't loud, it wasn't full of joy, but it was real. And in that moment, the world felt lighter. That night she brought out her paints again. The cottage smelled of turpentine and rain as she stood by the canvas, brush in hand, barefoot and silent. I sat by the fire, watching the light dance across her face. She was painting something. I couldn't tell what at first, until she stepped aside and I saw it. It was her father. Not the cold man from the mansion, not the shadow from her nightmares. This version was softer, his eyes filled with something close to peace. Behind him, faintly, a woman's hand rested on his shoulder. Her mother's. When she noticed me staring, she said quietly, "He wasn't a monster, Ethan. He was just broken. And broken people hurt the ones they love most." "You don't have to justify him," I said. "I'm not." She dipped her brush again. "I'm forgiving him so I can remember him without hating myself." I watched her paint, until her hand started to tremble. When she finally put the brush down, she turned toward me with eyes red but clear. "He wanted me to laugh again," she said, "but I think he forgot what laughter really is." "What is it?" I asked. She stepped closer, her voice soft. "It's not joy. It's not happiness. It's remembering that life goes on, even when you don't think you can." She sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. The fire crackled quietly between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, without warning, she laughed. It wasn't the laughter she used to have, sharp, forced, defensive. It was quieter, steadier, the sound of someone remembering how to breathe. But there was something else in it, too. Grief, nostalgia, maybe even love. Her laughter didn't sound like joy. It sounded like goodbye. I felt it echo through me, through every scar and silence we'd shared. She turned toward me, her expression softening. "He'd hate this," she said. "What?" "Me laughing without him." "He'd hate a lot of things about this moment," I said. "That's what makes it perfect." Her hand found mine again, fingers intertwining, no longer trembling. The firelight danced across her face, and for the first time, I saw something in her that hadn't been there before. Peace. Not the kind that forgets pain, but the kind that makes room for it. When the fire burned low, we stepped outside. The night air was cool, and the first drops of rain began to fall again, gentle and rhythmic. She tilted her face to the sky, eyes closed, letting it wash over her. "Do you ever think about what's next?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "I think about what's here." Then she turned to me, her voice softer than the rain. "You never got paid, did you?" As the rain began to fall, she whispered, "You never got paid, did you?" In the end, the only thing I earned was the one thing he never had: peace. 6 months later, the world felt like it had finally stopped spinning so fast. The headlines had long faded, the news anchors had moved on to fresher scandals, and the sterling name had quietly drifted from the front page to the forgotten corners of memory. The mansion still stood, empty and hollow, but we hadn't gone back since the night it stopped echoing with secrets. Instead, Ava and I built something smaller, something real. We found a little farmhouse outside of Portland, one of those places where time seems to move slower, where the wind smells like pine and the nights hum with crickets instead of engines. The cottage was crooked in all the right ways: chipped paint, uneven floorboards, a front porch that creaked like it was trying to join every conversation. We fixed what we could, and what we couldn't, we learned to live with. Ava turned one of the spare rooms into an art studio. The walls were covered in canvases, bright, wild, full of color. She said she didn't paint for therapy anymore. She painted because she finally could. Sometimes she sold them, sometimes she gave them away. Each piece carried a little of her, and sometimes a little of him. As for me, I'd started writing again. Not jokes, not sets, not the endless cycle of trying to make strangers laugh for money, but stories. Real ones. The kind that made people feel, instead of forget. My first essay got published in a small magazine under the title, "The Price of Laughter." I didn't expect it to resonate with anyone, but it did. Letters poured in from people who had lost, who had loved, who had tried to fix what was never theirs to fix. People who knew what it meant to laugh through pain. Sometimes, when I read those letters aloud, Ava would smile, that quiet, knowing smile, the one that carried both pride and sadness. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. There were still nights when she woke up from dreams she didn't want to remember, when the rain hit the windows too hard, and the sound reminded her of a bridge and a phone call that never ended. On those nights, I'd hold her until the shaking stopped. We didn't talk about her father often, but when we did, it wasn't with anger anymore. Just understanding. Because time hadn't erased him. It had just softened the edges. One evening, near the end of summer, we sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the pines. The sky was painted in the same orange and violet shades she used to mix in her paintings, and for a moment, everything felt exactly where it should be. She had her feet tucked under her on the swing, a cup of tea balanced on her knee. I was reading from an old notebook, something half-finished and too sentimental to ever show anyone. "Read me the ending," she said suddenly. I looked up. "It doesn't have one yet." "Then make one up." I thought for a second, then smiled. "All right. The ending goes like this. The man who once thought laughter was his job finally learned it was his home. And the woman who forgot how to smile found her way back to it. Not because someone made her laugh, but because she remembered how to live. She laughed, softly, sincerely, the kind of laugh that fills a room without trying. That's a good ending," she said. "It's not an ending," I replied. "It's just where the story rests for a while." She leaned her head against my shoulder, quiet for a long time. The evening air was cool, the sky now streaked with fading light. Then, in that hush between one heartbeat and the next, she said something that stayed with me long after. "You know, I used to think happiness had to be earned," she murmured, "that it came with a price tag, approval, forgiveness, wealth, whatever. But I think now it's just noticing things. The way the light hits the window in the morning, the sound of you talking to yourself when you write, the smell of coffee that burns a little at the edges. Those are the things I missed when I was trying to be happy." I turned to look at her. "You think your father ever found that kind of peace?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think maybe he has now." And somehow I believed her. When the stars began to show, I stood and walked to the edge of the porch. The fields stretched out before us, wild, open, alive. I could almost hear his voice again, that first night in his study, when he'd slid the envelope across the table and told me to make her laugh. When a billionaire tells you to make someone laugh, you don't ask why. You ask how much. That's how this had all started. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped counting money and started measuring moments instead. Ava joined me at the railing, her shoulder brushing mine. "You never did get paid," she said, teasing softly. I smiled. "I think I did." "Oh?" "Yeah. He paid me with something better. He gave me you." She looked up at me, eyes shining in the starlight. Then maybe it was the only deal he ever got right. We stood there until the night swallowed the last traces of sunset, until the cicadas began to sing and the world felt both new and ancient. There was no more mansion, no more fortune, no more debt between laughter and pain. Just us, standing in the middle of everything we'd lost and realizing it was enough. In the end, I didn't earn millions, I didn't buy peace, I found it. And this time, it didn't cost a thing. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Hit like, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe for more stories that remind you healing is possible.